Imagine this. You're living in the U.S., contributing, maybe supporting your family, and there are thousands, potentially even tens of thousands of dollars in tax benefits, tax credits, rightfully yours, just sitting there.
Waiting to be claimed.
Exactly. But here's the kicker. They're locked behind a number you might not even know how to get. And it's not a Social Security number.
Right.
If you're earning income here, or even just claiming dependents and you don't have an SSN, you could be leaving a huge amount of money on the table, just gone.
It's kind of surprising how often that happens.
Welcome to the deep dive. We crack open those dense financial documents and turn them into clear, actionable insights, stuff you can actually use to, improve your finances.
Make things work better for you.
Today, we are slicing through the IRS jargon, specifically Form W-7 instructions, to unlock the secrets of the individual taxpayer identification number, the ITIN. We're talking about how it can be your key to unlocking crucial tax advantages, real money back in your pocket.
Yeah, and it's fascinating how often folks, even people who are pretty diligent about their finances, just overlook the specific benefits an ITN can provide. Especially, deductions and credits that can really add up.
It's not just about paying what you owe.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's fundamentally about claiming what you're rightfully owed, optimizing your whole situation within the U.S. tax system.
And we're armed with the latest instructions for Form W-7, the December 2024 revision, straight from the IRS. Looks a bit daunting, maybe.
A little bit, yeah. IRS forms often do.
But it's packed with gold. Our mission today is to pull out the most vital nuggets for you. We're focusing on who needs an ITN, why it's so critical for your wallet, and most importantly, how it directly connects to claiming significant tax benefits and just navigating the system more smoothly. We want you to know exactly how to get those dollars.
Let's get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this first. What exactly is an ITN? Like, fundamentally.
Right. So at its core, it's a 9-digit number. The IRS issues it.
9 digits. Okay.
And its purpose, its only real purpose, is to be a U.S. taxpayer ID number for federal tax stuff. It's for people who need a taxpayer ID but aren't eligible to get a Social Security number, an SSN.
That distinction is huge, isn't it? ITN versus SSN.
Absolutely critical. The IRS is super clear on this. An ITN is only for federal tax purposes. That's it.
So it doesn't mean you can get Social Security benefits later.
Nope. Doesn't entitle you to Social Security, doesn't change your immigration status, doesn't give you the right to work in the U.S., none of that. Strictly federal taxes.
Strictly taxes. Got it. And here's something that sounds like it could save a lot of trouble.
What's that?
If you already have an SSN, or if you're actually eligible for one, maybe you're a U.S. citizen, a permanent resident, or you have work authorization, then you absolutely should not apply for an ITI.
Correct. Your SSN is your number for tax purposes. Full stop.
And what if you've applied for an SSN, but you're still waiting?
Good question. The IRS says wait. Don't apply for the ITN yet. Only if the Social Security Administration, the SSA, sends you a letter saying, nope, you're not eligible for an SSN, then you apply for the ITN using Form W-7.
And you have to attach that denial letter.
You absolutely have to attach that denial letter to your W-7 application. Proof.
Okay. And another really key point. What if you get an SSN after you've already been using an ITIN?
Ah, yes. The moment you get that SSN, you have to stop using the ITN immediately. Switch over to the SSN for all your tax filings from then on.
So you can't have both active, really.
No, the system wants you using the right identifier. Using an ITN when you have or are eligible for an SSN can cause some serious processing problems down the line. It's not just red tape, it's foundational for accurate reporting.
Okay, foundational. Makes sense. So connecting this back to, well, our wallets, how does this ITIN directly impact finances?
Right. The most direct, impactful way is through what the IRS calls allowable tax benefits. This is really where the light bulb goes on for a lot of people.
Allowable tax benefits, that sounds important.
It is, because it translates directly into potential tax savings, sometimes pretty substantial savings. Before 2018, things were a bit different, maybe simpler with exemptions.
Right, I remember exemptions.
They're gone, mostly. The rules changed significantly for tax years after December 31st, 2017. The IRS instructions now are very, very specific.
Oh, so?
Spouses and dependents, they are not eligible for a new ITN or even to renew an ITN unless they're being claimed for one of these specific allowable tax benefits, or Alternatively, if they're filing their own tax return.
Okay, so just being a dependent isn't enough anymore.
Exactly. That's the crucial shift. You can't just list someone as a dependent on your return and assume that gets them the ITN or qualifies for the renewal. That's a common mistake.
A really easy mistake to make, I bet.
It is, because the IRS is incredibly precise here. Merely listing a dependent, just putting their name down, is not considered an allowable tax benefit on its own.
Wow.
You have to explicitly link that person, your spouse, your dependent, to a specific credit or a filing status. Often, it comes down to checking a specific box on the tax form, maybe one you didn't even notice.
Like a tiny checkbox somewhere?
Sometimes, yeah. Or attaching a specific schedule or form. If you miss that link, that specific action on the return, you could lose out on thousands in credits, even if the rest of your return is perfect.
That's kind of scary.
It requires precision. So, to prove eligibility for the ITN for your spouse or dependent, they have to be listed on the U.S. federal tax return you attach to the W-7, and you need to include that specific schedule or form or make sure that crucial box is checked on the return itself. That demonstrates the allowable tax benefit.
Without that explicit link.
The ITN application for them might get denied, and you miss the tax savings. It ensures ITNs for people not filing their own return are only issued when there's a clear, defined tax purpose leading to a legitimate financial advantage for the filer. It's like a puzzle, and every single piece has to fit just right.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics. How exactly do these rules translate into actual tax savings? This is where it gets really interesting, right? Where the ITN actually puts money back in your pocket.
Exactly. This is the payoff for navigating the rules. The W-7 instructions clearly list the specific benefits an ITN can unlock, directly affecting your tax bill and potential refund.
Let's walk through them. What's the first big one?
First up, a common one. An ITN for a spouse filing a joint return.
Okay.
So, if you're married to a U.S. citizen or a resident alien, but you yourself don't have an SSN, you can get an ITIN specifically so you too can file a joint federal tax return.
And why is filing jointly such a big deal for your wallet?
Well, in most situations, the married filing jointly status leads to a lower overall tax bill compared to if you both filed as married filing separately.
Lower taxes. That's the goal.
Right. You usually get a bigger standard deduction. The tax brackets are often more favorable. It's a direct, often pretty powerful tax-saving strategy. Remember, those old spousal exemptions are gone post-2017. So this ability to file jointly now is really key for optimizing taxes as a married couple.
Without that ITN for the spouse, you'd likely be stuck filing separately.
Probably, yeah. Which often means a higher tax bill, maybe missing out on certain credits or deductions, potentially losing refund money. So getting that ITN is crucial.
Okay, so joint filing is a big one. What else?
Next, let's look at benefits tied to your filing status itself, specifically head of household, HOH,
Yeah.
and qualifying surviving spouse, QSS.
Head of household. That helps single parents often, right?
Often, yes, or someone supporting other qualifying relatives. If you qualify for HOH status, it usually gives you a better tax rate and a higher standard deduction than filing as just single. It's sort of a middle ground between single and married filing jointly.
A significant tax break.
Can be, yeah. Now, to qualify for HOH with an ITN involved, the person needing the ITN must be your qualifying child or qualifying relative who lives with you for more than half the year. Or it could be your parent, even if they don't live with you, under certain conditions.
And the paperwork.
The attached tax return needs to have the head of household box checked, obviously. But crucially, it must also list the ITN applicant as a dependent. Without that ITN for the qualifying person, you might be forced to file as single, which could easily cost you hundreds, maybe thousands more in taxes.
Okay. And qualifying surviving spouse, that's for widows or widowers.
Exactly. It offers similar tax benefits to HOH, those favorable rates and higher deduction, for up to 2 years after your spouse's death,
Rough.
but only if you have a dependent child living with you. It's meant to ease the financial burden during a really tough time.
And the ITN connection.
Here, the ITN applicant must be your child or stepchild, not a foster child, and they must have lived with you the entire year, allowing for temporary absences like school.
Now, you mentioned a critical caution for both HOH and QSS.
Yes, this is super important. The IRS instructions explicitly say, an ITI will not be assigned or renewed for an HOH or QSS qualifying person who is not also claimed as a dependent on an attached tax return.
So just checking the HOH or QSS box isn't enough.
Not enough. The person who makes you eligible for that status, the one needing the ITI, must also be listed as your dependent on that same return and properly claimed as such. It's a two-part requirement. miss the dependency part, and the ITIN application can be denied. Very common mistake.
2 parts. Got it. Okay, moving beyond family status, what about education? That's a big expense for many.
Huge. And an ITIN can make a real difference here with the American Opportunity Tax Credit, AOTC.
The AOTC, that one's worth a lot, right?
It really is. Up to $2,500 per eligible student for their first 4 years of college or vocational school. It covers tuition, fees, books, supplies.
$2,500. That's not pocket change.
Definitely not. It can make a serious dent in education costs. And here's the direct ITIN link. The dependent student needs an ITIN to claim this credit.
So no ITIN, no AOTC.
Right, correct. That $2,500 credit, and listen, up to $1,000 of it, can even be refundable, meaning you get cash back even if you owe zero tax. It's just off the table without the student's ITN.
Wow, refundable too.
Yeah. So for the application, you'll need your attached tax return and Form 8863 education credits, which specifically lists the student applicant as your dependent eligible for the AOTC. If you're supporting a student who qualifies otherwise but just lacks an SSN, getting them that ITN is absolutely essential to grab those savings.
Essential. Okay. What about healthcare costs?
Another critical area, the premium tax credit, PTC.
PTC, that's for marketplace insurance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Health insurance purchased through the health insurance marketplace. The PTC is a refundable tax credit designed to help eligible individuals and families afford those premiums.
Refundable again, that means potential cash back.
Yes, it can lower your tax bill below zero, resulting in a refund. The ITN connection is that an ITN is needed for the applicant if they're claiming the credit or if they're part of the household whose income is used to figure out the credit amount.
So even if they aren't the one buying the insurance directly?
Right. If their income counts towards the household total used for eligibility, they might need an ITN. As usual, the attached tax return needs to list the applicant, and you'll typically use Form 8962, Premium Tax Credit.
And this helps make insurance affordable.
Significantly reduces the cost for many low to moderate income families. Without the necessary ITN for a family member, you might not calculate the credit correctly, or they might not be able to claim their share, leading to much higher out-of-pocket costs for essential health coverage.
Makes sense. What about childcare? Lots of working parents need that.
Absolutely. That brings us to the Child Independent Care Credit, CDCC.
CDCC. Okay.
Now, this one is non-refundable. That means it can reduce the tax you owe down to zero, but you don't get any of it back as a direct refund beyond that.
Still valuable, though. Reduces the tax bill.
Very valuable. It helps offset the money you paid for the care of a qualifying person, usually a child under 13, or a disabled spouse, or dependent specifically so you could work or look for work. Daycare, after-school programs, summer camp, even a nanny in some cases.
And the ITN.
The dependent who received the care needs an ITN.
Okay.
And here's an interesting detail from the instructions. You can submit the Form W-7 to get an ITN for the CDCC, even if your tax return shows you don't actually owe any tax that the credit could reduce.
Really? Even with no tax liability?
Yeah, it highlights its sort of standalone value. It still establishes the potential credit, maybe for future years, or perhaps interacts with other calculations. For documentation, you need the attached tax return listing the applicant as a dependent, plus Form 2441 child independent care expenses.
Okay, interesting. One more main benefit listed.
Yes. The last one we'll detail here is the credit for other dependents, ODC. This one is often misunderstood.
ODC, what makes it different?
It's also non-refundable, like the CDCC, and it's worth up to $500 per qualifying dependent. The key is, it's for dependents who cannot be claimed for the main child tax credit.
Who would that be?
Think older children, like age 17 or older, who are still your dependents, or maybe adult dependents you support, like an elderly parent living with you. And crucially for our discussion, it also applies to children who only have an ITN and therefore don't qualify for the child tax credit itself under current rules.
Ah, so this is the credit specifically for dependents with ITNs in many cases.
It often is, yes. The dependent needs an ITN, and they also must be a U.S. resident or U.S. national to qualify you for this credit. While $500 might seem smaller than some other credits, it's $500 per dependent directly cutting your tax bill.
Okay, $500 is $500. Now, you flagged something critical about this ODC earlier, something easily missed.
Yes, absolutely vital. And it goes back to that point about explicitly claiming the benefit. The IRS instructions have this warning almost buried in there, but it could cost you real money.
What does it say?
It says basically, listing a dependent on the attached tax return is not an allowable tax benefit on its own. We covered that. But then it says, specifically for the ODC, if your dependent qualifies you for the ODC, be sure to check the box for the ODC. For example, when preparing your tax return, tax software might not automatically check the credit for other dependents box for a dependent with no taxpayer identification number listed on the tax return. You need to make sure this box is checked.
Wow, so the software might just skip it,
It
even
might.
if the person qualified.
It might. Because it sees no SSN, it might default to not checking the ODC box. The responsibility is on you, the taxpayer, to know your dependent qualifies and to physically or electronically ensure that specific box next to their name on the Form 1040 is checked.
That is a huge potential pitfall, a $500 pitfall per dependent.
Exactly. So if you're aiming for this credit for someone with an ITIN, you absolutely must double-check that box, manually confirm it's checked. For documentation, it's the attached return with that credit for other dependents box clearly marked next to their name. That simple check mark is the difference between getting the credit and leaving $500 on the table.
That's a fantastic tip. Are there other similar hidden traps, like easily missed checkboxes that people should watch out for with iTunes?
That's a great question. The ODC box is probably the most stark example related directly to ITINs because of the software issue potential.
Hmm.
But the underlying principle applies elsewhere, like we discussed with head of household.
Right, needing the dependency claim, too.
Exactly. You check the HOH box and you list the qualifying person as a dependent. The IRS isn't going to connect the dots for you. You have to draw the lines explicitly on the form. Precision is just paramount. It's a recurring theme.
Precision. Okay. Now, we've talked about all these doors the ITN opens, but are there limitations, things it doesn't unlock compared to an SSN?
Absolutely crucial to understand the limits. This is where that ITN versus SSN distinction really hits the wallet.
Like what?
The big one for many working families is the Earned Income Credit, EIC.
EIC. That can be worth a lot, right?
Thousands of dollars, potentially. It's a major refundable credit for low to moderate income working individuals and families. But if you file your tax return using an ITN, either for yourself, your spouse, or qualifying children, you are not eligible for the EIC, period.
So ITN holders are completely excluded from the EIC.
Completely excluded. That's a huge difference compared to SSN holders. For many families, the EIC is a financial lifeline, and it's simply not available with an ITN.
That's significant. Anything else major?
Yes. The Child Tax Credit, CTC, and the related Additional Child Tax Credit, ACTC. Under current law, specifically for tax years 2018 through 2025, a child who has an ITN cannot be claimed as a qualifying child for the CTC or ACTC.
So even if they meet all other requirements, the ITN disqualifies them from the main child tax credit.
For those specific years, yes. They might qualify you for the $500 credit for other dependents, ODC, we just talked about, but not the much larger, potentially refundable child tax credit. Again, a major financial difference for families depending on their situation.
So ITNs unlock some benefits, but definitely not all of them.
Exactly. It's vital to manage expectations. And always remember, the moment you get that SSN, you stop using the ITN and switch over. The SSN generally unlocks more benefits and is the required identifier if you're eligible.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on how vital an ITN is for filing your tax return and claiming those specific benefits. Makes sense. But here's an interesting twist. Are there times you might need an ITN even if you don't actually have to file a U.S. tax return?
Yes, there are. And this catches people by surprise sometimes. It usually relates to situations where some third party, like a bank or a payer, needs to report income paid to you or withhold taxes, even if you personally don't have a filing requirement.
Third-party reporting.
Hi.
Like banks reporting interest.
It's exactly. Or partnerships reporting income distributions. The IRS has outlined several specific exceptions to the general rule that you need to attach a tax return to your Form W-7. These exceptions cover situations where you need the ITI mainly for reporting compliance or maybe to claim tax treaty benefits on certain U.S. income.
Okay, exceptions. So what's the first one?
The first one is Exception 1, passive income and tax treaty benefits.
Passive income, like investments.
Yeah, things like partnership income, interest from a U.S. bank account, annuities, income from renting out U.S. property, royalties, dividends from U.S. stocks. If you're receiving this kind of income and it's subject to third-party withholding, or if you're eligible to claim benefits under a tax treaty between your home country and the U.S., you might need an ITI under this exception.
Give me an example.
Okay, imagine Lena. She lives overseas but invests in a U.S. partnership that owns rental properties. The partnership distributes income to her.
Okay.
The partnership might need to withhold U.S. tax on that income. Without an ITN, they might have to withhold at the maximum rate. But if Lena gets an ITN, she might be able to claim a reduced withholding rate under a tax treaty, meaning more cash reaches her overseas.
Ah, so the ITN helps her get the treaty benefit, less tax withheld.
Precisely. For documentation, she'd likely need things like a copy of the partnership agreement, maybe an original signed letter from the bank or the partnership confirming they need the ITN for distributions or reporting. You'd see forms like 1042S, 1099 INT, Schedule K1 involved.
Important caveat here.
Yes. Yeah. This exception is not for people who actually are required to file a U.S. tax return anyway. And it's not for folks getting paid for personal services like wages if they're eligible for an SSN. This is strictly for passive income or treaty benefits on that income without a separate filing requirement.
Got it. What's exception 2?
Exception 2 covers other income types like wages, scholarships, gambling winnings, also often linked to tax treaty benefits.
So this can involve wages, unlike the first exception.
Yes, but specifically when you're claiming tax treaty benefits on those wages. Or it could be for claiming treaty benefits on scholarships, fellowships, grants, or even certain gambling winnings. It also applies if you receive taxable scholarships or grants, but aren't claiming treaty benefits, maybe because there isn't one.
Okay, example time again.
Sure. Think about Maria, an exchange student from, say, Germany studying in the U.S. She gets a scholarship.
Okay.
If the U.S.-Germany tax treaty says scholarships are exempt from U.S. tax, Maria would need an ITN to claim that exemption on Form 8233, so the university doesn't withhold taxes from her scholarship money unnecessarily.
Makes sense. Saves her money. What about documentation?
It varies. For treaty benefits on wages, maybe an original employment letter or contract, plus proof you're entitled to the treaty benefit, maybe attaching Form 8233. For scholarships, perhaps an original letter from the university detailing the grant.
Any special notes for students here?
Yes, a really helpful one. If you're a student on an F1, J1, or M1 visa and you won't be working in the U.S., you might be able to skip getting that SSN denial letter we talked about earlier. You can provide a letter from your school's designated school official, DSO, or your program's responsible officer, RO, stating you won't be getting a job or income from personal services. That letter can substitute for the SSN denial. Big convenience for many students.
That is helpful. Anything else for students?
Yeah, another great convenience. If you're a non-resident alien student or exchange visitor, and your school is SEVP approved, Student Exchange Visitor Program, the school can issue a special certification letter.
What does that letter do?
If you use a certifying acceptance agent, CAA, to help with your W-7, this letter lets the CAA verify your identity using your original documents without having to mail them to the IRS. The CAA verifies the docs, attaches the certification letter, and sends the package. You keep your passport. Huge relief for students worried about mailing their only passport.
Wow, that's a game changer for them. Okay, exception 3.
Exception 3, mortgage interest reporting. Pretty straightforward.
Sounds like it involves property.
Exactly. If you're a non-resident who owns U.S. real estate and you have a U.S. mortgage on that property, your lender needs to report the mortgage interest you pay each year to the IRS, usually on Form 1098.
So the lender needs the ITN.
Correct. They need your ITN to properly report that interest payment. Even if you don't have to file a U.S. tax return, maybe it's just a vacation home you don't rent out, the lender still has this reporting requirement.
Like John, our Florida vacation home example.
Perfect example. John might not file, but his U.S. bank needs his ITN for that Form 1098. Documentation here is just proof of the mortgage copy of the sales contract, settlement statement, something showing the loan exists.
It's okay. Exception 4.
Exception 4. Dispositions of U.S. real property interest. This is about selling U.S. property.
Selling.
Okay. Yeah. Under a rule called FIRPT, a Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act. When a foreign person sells U.S. real estate, the buyer is usually required to withhold a percentage of the sales price, like 15%, as a prepayment of potential U.S. capital gains tax owed by the seller.
So the government makes sure they get paid.
Basically, yes. Yeah. The foreign seller needs an ITIN to handle this process correctly. They'll need it for the withholding forms like Form 8288 and 8288-NEN, and they might need it to apply for a withholding certificate, Form 8288B, if they think the tax owed is less than the standard withholding amount, potentially getting some of that withheld money back faster.
Our example, Sarah, selling inherited property in California.
Exactly. She'd need an ITIN for the buyer to process the withholding correctly, and for her to eventually file a return to reconcile the tax and claim any refund if too much was withheld. Docs needed would be the completed Form 8288 series, plus the sales contract or closing statement.
Got it. Last exception.
Exception 5, Treasury Decision, TD 9363. This one's more niche.
Sounds technical.
It is. It's mainly for non-U.S. individuals who act as representatives for foreign corporations that have IRS e-filing requirements.
So the person filing for the company needs the ITN.
Yes. If a foreign company has certain U.S. reporting obligations that must be filed electronically, and the person authorized to hit submit is a non-U.S. person without an SSN, that representative needs an ITIN just to facilitate that electronic filing for the company.
Okay, documentation for that.
Usually an original signed letter from the foreign company on their letterhead stating you're the designated representative for e-filing under TD 9363 and you need the ITN for that purpose. So these exceptions show the ITN isn't just about filing your own 1040, it plays a role in lots of other U.S. financial reporting and compliance.
Okay, so let's say you figured out why you need an ITN. Maybe it's for those tax credits, maybe it's one of the exceptions. Now comes the practical part. How do you actually get it? Let's talk about the how-to, the application process itself.
Right. And this is where meticulous attention to detail is absolutely crucial. A small mistake here can cause big delays, potentially costing you those benefits we talked about.
So precision is key again. What are the ways to apply?
The IRS gives you a few options, each with pros and cons. The most common way is probably by mail.
Just mail everything in?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
You send your completed Form W-7, your original valid U.S. federal tax return, if you're applying because of a tax benefit, and all your original supporting identity documents or certified copies from the issuing agency.
Originals.
Right.
Like my passport.
Okay.
Through the mail. That sounds nerve-wracking.
It can be, yeah. That's a major consideration. And you have to send it to a specific IRS address in Austin, Texas, the ITN operation. Don't send it to the regular address you'd use for filing your tax return. It's a dedicated P.O. box just for ITN applications. Using the wrong address is a classic mistake causing delays.
How long does it take to get those originals back?
The IRS says typically within 60 days, they'll return them to the mailing address on your Form W-7, but 60 days can feel like an eternity when it's your passport or birth certificate.
Definitely. Any way to speed that up.
You can include a prepaid express mail or courier envelope with your application package. They'll use that to return your documents faster and with tracking, which offers some peace of mind.
Okay, prepaid envelope. Good tip. What if I want proof I mailed it?
Then you might use private delivery services like FedEx or UPS. They have a specific physical street address in Austin you could use. This gives you tracking and delivery confirmation. More security.
Right. What about doing it in person? Avoid mailing originals altogether.
That's an option too, using IRS Taxpayer Assistance Centers, 2ACs. This is a big draw for many.
The big benefit being...
You get your original documents back immediately. They review them, verify them, and hand them right back to you. Huge relief compared to mailing.
Sounds great. What's the catch?
A few things. First, you must have an appointment. You can't just walk in. Call 844-545-564 to schedule one. Second, and this is critical, not all tax offer ITIN document authentication service. Only certain designated tax do.
So I have to check first.
Absolutely. Call and confirm that the specific tax you plan to visit actually handles ITIN document review. For dependents, they can verify passports, national ID cards, and birth certificates. If you go to a tax that doesn't offer this service, they'll just take your whole package, W-7, return original documents, and mail it to Austin for you.
Defeating the purpose of going in person to keep your documents?
Exactly. So verify the service before you make the appointment.
Okay. Any other ways to apply?
Yes, and this can be a really valuable route. Using an acceptance agent, AA, or a certifying acceptance agent, CAA.
Acceptance agents, what do they do?
An acceptance agent, AA, is authorized by the IRS to help you prepare and submit your Form W-7 and supporting documents. They review everything, but they generally still have to mail your original documents or certified copies to the IRS in Austin.
So, similar to mailing it myself, but with help preparing the form?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Now, the certifying acceptance agent, the CAA, is different and offers a significant advantage.
How so?
CAAs have a special agreement with the IRS. They can review and verify your original identification documents or certified copies for primary and secondary applicants. For dependents, they can verify passports and birth certificates. The key is they verify the documents are authentic, make copies for the IRS, and give your originals right back to you.
They don't mail the originals.
Nope. They send copies along with a certificate of accuracy to the IRS. This avoids mailing your irreplaceable documents entirely. It reduces risk, speeds things up for you, and lowers anxiety considerably.
That sounds like a fantastic option, maybe worth paying for.
For many people, especially those uneasy about mailing originals, using a CAA is definitely worth the fee. It just streamlines the whole document part of the process.
Okay, so we know the how. What about the when? Timing. You said it's key.
Crucial, especially for first-time ITN applications tied to a tax return. The general rule is, attach your completed Form W-7 to the front of your valid U.S. federal tax return. Mail the whole package on or before the tax return's due date, including any extensions you filed for.
File them together by the deadline.
Yes. And here's that critical warning again, directly impacting your money. The IRS states, failure to timely file the tax return with a complete Form W-7 and required documentation may result in the denial of refundable credits, such as the American Opportunity Tax Credit, if you otherwise qualify.
Denial of credits just for being late with the W-7 package.
Yes. If you're counting on that $2,500 AOTC, for example, messing up the timing or completeness of the ITN application package could mean you lose that credit entirely for that year. It's a direct financial hit. Don't file the return without the W-7 and documents attached if the ITN is needed for that return.
Okay. Huge warning. What about e-filing? Can I e-file that first return with the W-7?
No. Another practical point. You cannot e-file a tax return using a newly assigned ITN in the same calendar year the ITN is assigned. That initial filing must be on paper, mailed in.
Paper only for year one. Good to know. What if I need to file multiple back-year returns?
You can attach all the tax returns for the years needing the ITN to that single Form W-7 application and mail them all together. But again, it's a paper process for that initial submission.
Okay. What about renewals? When do I apply to renew an ITN?
For renewal ITN applications, you submit the Form W-7, making sure to check the Renew box, along with your U.S. federal tax return for the year the ITN is needed. So similar process, attach it to the return.
Only if it's expired and I need it for the return.
Exactly. If the ITN has expired based on those non-use rules, and you need to include it on a tax return you're filing for yourself, spouse, or dependent, then you must renew it with that return.
But what if it expired but I'm not filing a return that uses it? Like that bank reporting example.
Right. If your ITN is only being used on third-party information returns, like a 1099 from a bank, and you yourself aren't filing a 1040 using that ITN, the IRS says you don't need to renew it at that time.
Okay.
However, if later on you do need to file a U.S. tax return that requires that ITN, maybe you start claiming a benefit, you must renew the ITN then before you file that return.
So renew when needed for filing. What happens if I don't renew an expired IPN but try to file a return with it anyway?
Expect delays. The IRS clearly states there may be a delay in processing your tax return. That could mean waiting much longer for your refund or for important IRS notices. It just gums up the works. Better to renew when required.
Delays, got it. Avoid delays. Now, the documents. This seems like the trickiest part. What exactly do I need?
It is often the trickiest part, yeah. The instructions are very specific, and getting this wrong is a main reason for rejection. You need documentation to prove two things: your identity and your foreign status, your connection to a foreign country.
Identity and foreign status.
Right. And at least one document you submit must have your photograph on it. The only exception is for dependents under 14 or under 18 if they're a student. Also, all documents must be current, not expired. An expired ID is invalid for this purpose.
Okay, current, photo ID generally needed. What's the easiest document?
The passport. The IRS calls the passport the only standalone document.
Standalone, meaning?
Meaning if you submit your original valid passport or a certified copy from the agency that issued it, you don't need to submit any other documents to prove identity and foreign status. One document does the trick. It's the simplest route if you have a valid passport. Your golden ticket.
Golden ticket. I like that. What if I don't have a passport or don't want to mail it?
Okay, then you need to submit at least two other types of documents from the list the IRS provides in the W-7 instructions.
2 documents instead of 1 passport. What kind of documents are on that list?
It's a specific list. Things like a U.S. visa issued by the State Department, a U.S. driver's license, a foreign driver's license, must have photo, a national identity card, if it has photo, name, address, DOB, expiration date, a civil birth certificate, this helps prove foreign status but not identity alone, U.S. military ID cards, foreign military ID cards, school records for students, medical records for young children. You have to pick at least 2 from their approved list, and remember, at least 1 must have your photo if you're not using a passport.
Okay, that list seems complicated. What about proving U.S. residency for dependents? You said that's tricky.
Very tricky and often required. Generally, proof of U.S. residency is needed for dependents applying under Reason D on Form W-7. That's the dependent of U.S. citizen residence reason.
What is it not required?
The main exceptions are for dependents of U.S. military personnel stationed overseas, or if the dependent is from Canada or Mexico and claimed for a benefit other than the credit for other dependents ODC.
Yeah.
If they're from Canada or Mexico and claimed only for the ODC, they do need to prove U.S. residency.
Okay. And what if the dependent's passport doesn't have a U.S. entry date stamp?
Good point. A passport without a date of entry stamp is not considered sufficient proof of U.S. residency on its own for dependents needing to prove it.
Right.
You'll need to provide additional documentation from the IRS list specific to proving residency.
And that list is age specific.
Yes, very specific based on the dependent's age.
Okay, break it down under 6.
Now, under 6 years old,
Well,
a U.S. medical record, like shot records, dated within 12 months, showing child's name, U.S. address, doctor facility name, a U.S. address, or a U.S. school record,
Yeah.
or a U.S. state ID card, or a U.S. visa.
Ages 6 to 17.
For at least 6, but under 18, a U.S. school record, like a report card or transcript dated within 12 months, showing name, U.S. address, school name address, attendance dates, or a U.S. state ID card, or a U.S. driver's license, or a U.S. visa.
And 18 or older.
For 18 and older, a U.S. school record, but only if they're under 24 and still a student, or a U.S. state ID card, or a U.S. driver's license, or a U.S. visa, or a U.S. bank statement, or a U.S. rental statement from a U.S. property, or our U.S. utility bill. These last 3 must show the applicant's name and U.S. address and be dated within 12 months.
Wow, okay, that's detailed. What about those medical and school records? Any quality requirements?
Yes, the IRS is picky here. They must be official documents. Medical records need name, address, date of care within 12 months, doctor facility name and U.S. address. School records need name, address, attendance grades, school name, U.S. address, term dates ending within 12 months. And they stress quality, blurry, illegible, or damaged documents will likely be rejected. They even provide a checklist in the instructions. Definitely use it.
Use the checklist, got it. Originals versus certified copies. Explain certified copy again.
Right. You submit either the original document or a certified copy from the issuing agency. A certified copy isn't just a photocopy. It's a copy provided by the actual agency that issued the original document, like the Vital Records Office for a birth certificate or the DMV for a license. They certify it's a true copy, usually with an official seal or stamp.
Can I get those from an embassy?
Sometimes. Your home country's embassy or consulate in the U.S. might offer services to certify copies of certain documents they issued, but you need to check with them directly about services, fees, and timing. Otherwise, you have to go back to the original issuing agency, which can be difficult. This is another reason why using a CAA is so appealing. They can verify originals directly.
Okay. What if my documents aren't in English?
Good question. You submit them as they are initially. However, the IRS reserves the right to request a certified English translation later if they deem it necessary during processing. So be prepared. That might be an additional step.
Okay, documents handled. Now, filling out the Form W-7 itself. Line-by-line precision needed.
Absolutely. Don't leave anything blank. If a line doesn't apply, write NA. This avoids questions and delays.
Okay, hit the key lines. Line 1A, name.
Line 1A, legal name. Must match your ID documents exactly. First name, middle initial, last name. Must appear exactly the same way on your tax return. Any difference can cause a mismatch and hold things up for months. If your name changed since you last got an IT on, marriage, etc., you must provide legal proof like a marriage certificate or court order with a W-7.
Line 1B, birth certificate name.
Line 1B, birth certificate name. Only fill this out if it's different from line 1A. Helps reconcile things.
Line 2, mailing address.
Line 2, mailing address. Critical. This is where they send your ITI notice and return your documents. Must be accurate and somewhere you can receive mail reliably. Let the IRS know if it changes.
Line 3, foreign address.
Line 3, foreign address. You must provide your permanent address outside the U.S., even if you're currently at the U.S. address on line 2. If you only put a country name here, be careful not to use a P.O. box or in care of on line 2, or they might reject it.
Line 4, date of birth.
Line 4, date of birth. Standard U.S. format. MMDDYYYY. Double check it.
Line 6A, country of citizenship.
Line 6A, country of citizenship. Full country name, no abbreviations.
Line 6B, foreign tax ID.
Line 6B, foreign tax ID, no. If your home country issued you one, like a Canadian SIN, enter it here. Helps with 3D claims especially.
Line 6C, visa info.
Line 6C, U.S. non-immigrant visa info. For visa holders, put your visa type, F1, H1B, etc., number, and expiration date, MMDDYYYY. Attach copies of supporting docs like I-94 or I-20 if you have them.
Line 6D, ID document detail.
Line 6B, identification, document info, and date of entry. Check the box for the type of ID you're submitting, passport, license, etc. Enter the issuer, ID number, expiration date, and crucially, your date of last entry into the U.S. MMDDYYYYY. If you never entered, write never entered. That entry date is vital, especially for dependent passports that need an improved residency.
Line 6C and 6F, previous I-time.
Line 66F, previous item RSN. Super important for renewals. Or if you ever had an IRS-issued number before, check yes on 6E if applicable, and list the previous ITN or IRSN on 6F, plus the name it was issued under. Forgetting this causes major delays, potential rejection as a duplicate. Don't skip this if it applies.
Line 6G, education business info.
Line 6G, education business info. Only if you're applying under Reason F, student researcher business exception. Enter the school or company name, city, state, and your length of stay. Helps verify your exception claim.
Finally, the signature.
Signature. Usually the applicant signs. If it's a minor child under 18, a parent or court-appointed guardian signs and notes their relationship. For an adult applicant, 18 plus, they signed, or a court-appointed guardian or someone with power of attorney, Form 2A48 attached. Here's a key rule often missed. A spouse can't sign for his or her spouse unless that power of attorney box is checked and the Form 2848 is attached. Being married doesn't automatically grant signing authority here. If someone can't sign their name, they can make a mark, like an X, with a witness signature too. Precision everywhere.
Okay, getting the ITN is a huge step. You've navigated the forms, sent the documents, you've unlocked those potential benefits. But it's not necessarily a one-and-done situation, is it? There's maintenance involved.
That's right. Like your driver's license or passport, an ITN requires some attention to keep it active and ensure you don't lose access to those benefits down the road. Understanding renewal is key.
So ITNs can expire. How does that work?
Yes, they can. The main rule is based on non-use. If an ITN hasn't been included on at least one U.S. federal tax return for the last 3 consecutive tax years, it automatically expires on December 31st of that third year.
3 years of non-use on a tax return, and it expires.
Exactly. So if you used it on your 2021 return but not on your 2022, 2023, or 2024 returns, it would expire December 31st, 2024.
Huh.
Also, ITNs issued before 2013 that were never renewed under previous rules might also need renewal now if you plan to use them.
Okay, so if my ITN has expired and I need it for my next tax return, what do I do?
You must renew it. The process is similar to applying the first time, but specifically for renewal. You fill out Form W-7 again, but this time you make sure to check the box at the top that says Renew an existing ITN.
Check the Renew box and submit it with my tax return.
Yes. Attach the Renewal Form W-7 to your U.S. federal tax return that lists the ITN you're renewing. And just like a new application, you need to include current supporting documentation that proves your identity and foreign status, consistent with what's on the W-7.
Same document rules apply.
Same rules. And if you're renewing an ITN for a spouse or dependents specifically to claim an allowable tax benefit, they still need to be listed correctly on that attached tax return with the right form, schedule, or box checked, proving they still qualify for that benefit. You're reestablishing the link.
Reestablish the link. Okay. But what if my ITN technically expired due to non-use, but I don't need it for my tax return right now, like that bank interest reporting situation again?
Good point. If your ITN is only being used on information returns filed by third parties, like that Form 1099 INT from the bank, and you are not filing a U.S. tax return that includes the ITN, the IRS says you don't need to renew it at this time.
Even if it's past the 3-year mark?
Even then. However, and this is the crucial however, if down the road you do need to file a U.S. tax return and use that ITN, maybe your situation changes, you qualify for a benefit, you will need to renew the ITN then before you file that return.
So it's a renew when needed for filing approach if it's only used for third-party reporting.
Exactly. Saves unnecessary paperwork if you don't currently need it for your own return.
What happens if I ignore this? If I file a return with an expired ITN that needed renewal?
Expect delays. Simple as that. The IRS warns that processing your tax return will be delayed. This could mean waiting much longer for any refund you're due, or delaying important IRS correspondence about your account. It creates a bottleneck that's pretty easy to avoid just by renewing when required.
Avoid the bottleneck. Makes sense. One last thing on renewal. What if my name has changed since I first got the ITN? Maybe I got married.
Excellent point. If your legal name has changed since the ITN was originally issued, you must submit legal documentation proving the name change along with your renewal form W-7.
Like a marriage certificate or a court order.
Exactly. A marriage certificate, divorce decree, court order showing the legal name change. This ensures your IRS records are updated with your current legal name and prevents mismatches or processing issues later on. Can save you a real headache. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. From just understanding what an ITN even is to digging into the specific tax credits and filing statuses it can unlock for you,
Navigating that sometimes tricky application process, the documents, the timing.
and even keeping it active through renewal. I think the core message, though, is really clear. An ITN is so much more than just a 9-digit number.
Oh, absolutely. It's a vital tool, a key, really, that can significantly impact your financial well-being within the U.S. tax system. It can unlock potentially thousands of dollars in benefits and credits that you might otherwise just miss out on.
Money left on the table.
Yeah. And what's truly fascinating, I think, is how digging into these IRS instructions, which seem so dry and technical on the surface.
Right, like reading stereo instructions sometimes.
Exactly. But understanding them actually empowers you to proactively claim the benefits you're entitled to.
Yeah.
Benefits that are easily overlooked if you don't know the specific
Yeah.
rules. This isn't just about, ticking the compliance box. It's truly about optimizing your financial situation, getting back every dollar the law allows.
Keeping more of your own hard-earned money.
That's the bottom line.
So, reflecting on all this, what does it mean for you, listening right now? Think about how diving deep into a seemingly boring IRS form like the W-7 instructions revealed all these tangible, real dollar financial advantages. It kind of raises a bigger question for all of us, doesn't it?
What's it?
What other overlooked details are lurking in our financial lives? Hidden away in fine print, obscure forms, instructions we never read, details that might be holding untapped opportunities for tax savings or smarter investments or just a better handle on our financial standing. What hidden advantages are just waiting there for us to uncover them if we just take the time to look?